Gabe and I are here so far and going to talk about some things we talked about yesterday on a weekly walk that we take with LA, who joins us, and I expect some others will. And it's been interesting to actually be out in the open air talking and walking. And my experience, and I think it's been shared by everyone, that the idea of walking and being busy in some functional manner actually gives the brain a little bit of room because it knows it's doing something productive. It's functioning, gives a little room to consider things in ways that may be a little broader, a little more contemplative. Like driving tends to be a very good meditation for keeping the brain busy with the things it needs to be monitoring, but also recognizing how vast the capacity we have is when we're not sitting idly and or still and don't have as much to think about. So I think that activity really helps, and we've been noticing that on these morning walks we've been doing. But Gabe, introduce to what you were just explaining to me that you were sort of grokking on yesterday.
Many topics from yesterday, but just one is the present trauma versus the past trauma, fear of the future. We also talked about control a little bit, but maybe we can start with the trauma, trying to bring it forward, bring it backward. Future trauma that hasn't happened yet, we're worried about, and past traumas we're focusing on and trying to bring them forward to continue the story and keep the feedback loop going in the head. So
what did you get? What was your sort of?
No, I think, I personally do, or at least did, bring forward from the past all those traumatic things, whether they were traumatic to others or not, just to me, that they guided my life for many years. The hatred, resentment, regret, all of that, but also it moved forward into future fear of things that would happen, that are not going to happen. Doom and gloom of the past presented itself as doom and gloom of the future, but all of this was literally me thinking all I am is what I think. So that once you consider that these things are not true and real, then it all falls apart like a house of cards. But I think I mentioned this yesterday too. While you're in it, at least for me, during those panic attacks and those times, it's hard to reach, to just smack yourself. Just everyone says, "Oh, think about something else. Oh, get out of it. Oh, take a walk." But the feedback loop of thought in your head is like, it's grabs a hold. And we also talked about the physiology of it, that the thinking turns into physical responses by the body to continue the story. So continuing the story isn't just thinking incorrect thoughts or thinking lies are true. It actually triggers some physical response from the body to add adrenaline, to release dopamine, to do all these other things to try and manage the affect. And so it was very interesting to talk about that yesterday. But for me, I think just once the thought process is identified and clarified, it all falls apart rather quickly because it's not real. So it can't be real to fall apart anyway. So it just evaporates instantly.
Yeah. Well, and that clarity can often be disarming because the depth I used to think, and people talk about all the time, that truth is deep, right? When in fact, truth can't be deep if it's always available. It must be superficially in reach constantly.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So Anthony's with us now. Anthony, we started on some points that we were talking about yesterday on a walk that we took. But if the presumption is that our thoughts are real and true rather than imagined, and then from there we immediately leap to believe that thinking about our thinking creates us, now we've literally taken on the opinion, the appearance, the seeming nature of the creator of reality. And none of this is true. None of it is accurate. It's simply thinking about thinking. Making believe thinking about thinking is in fact reality has us think that thinking about thinking is thinking about ourselves, when in fact we are intact in the present, simply observing what we're thinking. And it's a mistake to think that this imposition, which is an imposter, this fraudulent identity that we can create and think is us, certainly within our realm to do that, our realm of thought, we're free to do that, actually becomes us. And so everything from that moment becomes corrupt. Everything becomes backward. A lie, by its nature, only exists as long as we claim it to be the opposite of what it can be, which is true. So the one thing a lie claims to be is the one thing it can never be. So the more we perpetuate it, the more we suffer and experience the demoralizing impact of that perpetuation, which is, I would suggest, present traumatic stress. Mm-hmm. And my experience in my history was that I used people, places, and things, which included times other than what was happening, to excuse my own culpability for what I'm doing in the present.
Well, yeah, stay there, Jack. Sorry, I'm reading something here from LA's notes here. That exact thing is, we want what we are thinking.
Yes.
It's a desire, it's a drive, it's a want.
Well, if we're in the present and we're free to think whatever we want, then whatever we think we want. And here's the sick part. When the thinking is coming out of thinking who we are is what we think, we immediately deny wanting what we get, because we're denying wanting the thought we're having as being the cause of that consequence, which is immediate and always going to be consequential to the thinking. That's going to be the first experience we have. It's not going to be what's happening with anybody else. It's what's happening with what we're thinking about everybody and anybody else, including the self we now think we are. So we're looking for an escape. How do we get out of this? How do I stop this? I got to get out of this. I got to feel better than this. I got to get over it. So what do? Use the past to dread the future. Regret the past to feel fear in the future. Why? Because what I'm doing now is going to manifest. If the newness of now is always new, the future is actually being converted into what I think about now that I'm horrified by. And the doom I'm feeling isn't about what might happen. It's about what is happening, recognizing that if I continue, it will continue to happen. Mm-hmm. So I talk about it as the future as though it's out there somewhere, when the past, the sum total of the present, is everything that's ever happened in the past. And I mean everything. I don't mean some things I thought about and other things I didn't think about. I mean the subtotal of everything I thought about and didn't think about as being my experience, and everything you thought about and didn't think about as being your experience, and everything everyone thought about and didn't think about, and everything that didn't think about what it was doing but knew what to do, like inanimate objects and nature. Everything that happened is in fact the present moment. It is, in fact, what we're experiencing in the present moment. It is how the earth is and how people are and how all of the results and consequences of that have evolved collectively, because they're not happening separately. They're happening as a unified field of activity that's always in the present happening. It's never somewhere else. There is nowhere else. Literally, there is no time in the present There is only time in thought, like there are only lies in thought, and there is only ego in thought, and there is only nightmares in thought. When the experience is limited to what we're thinking about our thinking, it isn't based in reality. It's simply based on our capacity to imagine things we're thinking to be real. And when we do that, it is depressing because maintaining impressions certainly suggests some weight is going on. And maintaining that is depressing. It presses on us. The longer we do it, the worse we get in that regard. Emotional turmoil and inner conflict is not an accident. It's not a coincidence until coincidence is seen as a coincidence, something occurring simultaneously to what we're doing, and thinking is something we do, so it is an action we take, and it is only ever taken in the present. So if you ever think you're not in the present, you're thinking in the present, you're not in the present. That's a conflict, I would think. So that past we use to blame is an attempt to escape. And what do? We put it on the people that were involved back then, not our interpretation of what happened. We put it on them for what we're doing about them in our thinking, or what we're thinking about them. And many of those people have died, and we still blame them because we've developed this idea that the maintenance of these ideas in thought, our job is to get better, feel better about them, by figuring them out in a way that will finally tell the story accurately enough and free us, while the telling of the story is inaccurate and condemning us, always. It's designed to do that because it's helping us realize that feeling bad and feeling wrong and feeling depressed, feeling pain are all evidence not of reality and truth. They're not confirming reality and truth. They're confirming we are aware of what we're thinking that's wrong. But what do? Twist it, turn it, try to see it as something else. We think pain confirms reality. It wouldn't hurt if it didn't exist. And yet the existence of it is all happening in our brain exactly the way the horror of a nightmare occurs. And what happens when we wake up, those nightmares that seem so real, so vivid, so penetrating, so horrifying, within seconds often, we can't even remember what was going on. All we remember is it was horrifying, but the details of it and the circumstances of it are gone because we're no longer thinking about it. There's nothing there to remember. We have to reconstruct it in thought, and it always comes in bits and pieces that don't seem accurate enough to replicate it, thankfully, because we'd rather face our day without that horrifying seeming reality, the effects of it, and yet we continue to do that to the degree that we're making believe all we are is what we think. Think of the alienation we create by thinking everything in the world is based on what we think, while we're not even thinking about most of everything in the world. We must be failing at our mission of creating reality and feel horrified at the effect. So we're always trying to feel better about it rather than recognize that what we're trying to feel better is worse, and get down to the essence and the cause rather than continue to treat the effects. Addiction treats effects. It treats symptoms. And as long as I treat a symptom, it's going to go on and on and on because I'm not looking at the cause. Alcoholism, for instance, we are not told to stop drinking. We're reminded that it's when we start drinking that the problem is caused. It's very evident, very brilliant bit of insight. Simple, but a brilliant bit of insight to a tendency of addictive thinking to think it needs to be stopped rather than ask, why do I keep starting this? Why do I consistently continue to manufacture this thought in the present? If all possibilities are possible in the present and I keep manufacturing it, I've got to be insane to do that. And the answer is bingo. Insanity does not, this now isn't biological or physiological insanity where a body is made or created in a way that is so deficient that it has no real cognitive ability to reckon with reality. This is now an insanity that's been created by someone fully capable who has decided that they are, in fact, only what they think. And now it's fully induced in the thinking of the individual. And yet, since we're all capable of thinking in the same way, because the platform of our DNA and our basis for existence is almost identical, We've done this historically thinking it's everybody else does it. It's the only thing to do. And a lot of experience, and my experience, is people talking about what everybody else is doing to justify they can't change what they're doing. Well, nobody's going to listen to that. It's hard to get through to people. People are never going to come to terms with that. That's too ethereal, too highly developed, too much intellect. My contention is it takes an enormous amount of intellect to maintain the resistance to what's actually happening. Think of the intellect and the creativity that goes into making believe that all we are is something trying to avoid reality and truth, while maintaining our own reality and truth in the name of thinking that's saving us while it's actually killing us. That's a much more developed complexity than simply conceding that reality and truth are real and true, and they aren't in my thoughts. My thoughts are a component of them. My thoughts are a byproduct of them. My thoughts are produced by that thing that seems to be invisible, seems to have no form, because it's not working in the same relative experience that our human experience is functioning in or dysfunctioning in. So beginning to see that the present is always present, we're only ever thinking in the present. There is no past in the present. There is no future in the present. There is only a past thought about. And I would suggest it's never thought about the way it happened. It's thought about in convenient terms to support the narrative that we've developed about what happened, to support the contention that we shouldn't be where we are now, or wouldn't be where we are now if it weren't for this, that, or the other thing that happened. It's interesting because if we can't be anywhere other than where we are, and we're thinking that our life's goal is excusing where we are, why would we be operating in any better way with everything else and anyone else, but in the same corrupt way of making believe that they're causing us harm and they're causing us damage, and it's their problem, not ours?
Well, that sucks.
Well, in the early part of the Course in Miracles, I remember reading a section where it said, if you're actually hearing this, and reading that book actually gave me a great bit of insight into this absolute nature, just being absolute. It had never occurred to me. It had. I mean, the present state of being was always aware, but my thinking, having been married to it for so long, thought that it wasn't there when I didn't think it was there, and thought it wasn't there when I didn't feel it was there, and thought it wasn't there when I didn't feel good. When circumstances went bad, it was allowing those circumstances to teach me a lesson rather than I was creating those circumstances so that I could learn better how to think. That if I was given everything, because it's infinite and we all have everything, it isn't a function of some other source doing what we're doing. It's a function of us starting to see that what we've been doing is very disturbing. And to see that clearly is to start to say, oh shit, or holy shit, which I would say is the iconic word for the ego. Holy shit, like it's divinity. We think we've created an ego that in actuality, the word ego means I, capitalized. It's who we are in essence. How do we use it? It's a false self. It's a false image. Oh, my ego needs stroking because I need to feel better about something. What am I talking about? I'm talking about my thoughts not feeling good because they're bad and wrong. And I'm trying to make them feel better. What am I doing? I'm treating them just like I do with alcohol and drugs and sex and gambling and anything I might do to feel that more and more and more, never moderation, but more and more is going to somehow satisfy the filling of this hole that doesn't even exist because it is not whole. It's simply conceived of as something real and true. It's just a thought. So taking insanity, for instance, seriously is to make believe it's true, when in fact, that's the whole point of insanity, is thinking something that is an illusion is in fact reality. It's the same as taking ourselves seriously. We think that taking ourselves seriously is wise when in fact it creates the opinion that all we are is what we think, and we become very susceptible to what everyone else thinks very quickly. And that's not all. It's a cavalcade of consequences that begins to occur that treat addiction by manufacturing consequences we don't want to claim responsibility for, so we want to claim that we're irresponsibility for them, which perpetuates the problem by maintaining there's nothing we can do about the cause. Thinking of it as something happening to us rather than being caused by us. Now, again, I'm not dealing with physiological and biological birth defects, whatever those things may be, but I will offer for consideration that a lot of those defects have devolved or evolved or devolved through decisions humans have made that were not healthy, that led to decisions that created bodies that were also not healthy, built under the weight of stress that's been perverted and contorted as a result of things we've done. We've poisoned our water. We've poisoned our food supply. Eating that stuff imposes on the DNA structure that's always flexible. It's always doing its best to adapt to its experience. And if we're filling it with toxic waste, and obsessive thinking is mental toxic waste. It's a toxicity that can't be sustained by our body because it undermines, as you mentioned, all of those bodily systems that we have that are, by the way, designed to maintain balance, maintain health. So the things we don't even have to think about, like those bodily systems, end up undermined by the thing we think about that doesn't even exist except to the thinking we think about it with. So you hear a lot, I've heard a lot about people saying, don't take yourself too seriously. Well, if the self isn't serious because it doesn't exist, taking it seriously has been the problem. So to take it less seriously and think there's still a self to take less seriously is again reinforcing the idea that there's actually a self rather than begin to see this is just a thought I have about a thought. That's it. There is no self to get better in that regard. The essence of our existence is shared. It's complete. It's whole. It is life itself. I am not living life. I am experiencing life through a human life form that is designed to deform and perform and inform and all the different formations that are possible, which is also to disintegrate at some point and return everything that it has right now to nature. None of it's going anywhere. It's just transforming into the elements that it's made up of right now that seem to have this agreement to be a body. Somehow that seems to happen. Has taking notes, Gabe, helped?
Well, this is a thing with me that I'm much more of an audio learner, but LA seems to be a note taker and a good one at that. And so it helps me to go back and look at it. But in the moment, if I start taking notes and start trying to type, I'm going to lose the sentence you're talking about. You know what I mean? Like for me,
Yeah.
The other thing
but the perspective offers perspective.
Yes.
So the contemplation it starts to become apparent that there's something else going on than what we normally think when we even think of it in terms that we normally don't think of it. Certainly thinking of things sanely compared to thinking of things insanely would be a marked shift of awareness. And the point being that if we already have an absolute, if there is anything that is absolute knowingness, if there is any being that is absolute, if there is any infinite source, we already know it. It can't be something we don't know, or we would be more powerful than it to block it in some way. And if there was a speck of it that was missing in the totality of all that it is, it would violate the whole construct of something infinite because it doesn't exist in space and time. even the dimensions that humans have realized around the fifth and sixth dimension, everything starts melding into a unified field that's whole that they've never been able to figure out yet. And I suspect it's because we're looking at it as something that is perplexing rather than as something we know. Kind of like we've talked before about when you lose your keys and just simply admit, if you were the one that lost them, you know where they are. Morning, Tony.
Morning.
If you're the one that lost your keys, you know where they are. You just don't think you know where they are. So if you keep thinking you don't know where they are, you're going to look everywhere they aren't, versus starting to think I do know where they are because I had them last. I was the one that had them. Here again is the responsibility. I want to think I don't know while I was the one that lost them. I was the one that put them wherever they are. So I must know. I must just not be thinking about it. And beginning to realize that I do know if I was the one that did anything with them. And if anybody else did something with them, then that's a little bit out of the scope of my ability to deal with. But I might have better clarity on the fact that something else other than what I did happened when I start actually conceding that I must have done something with them. And I'll remember the last place they were once I start thinking I don't know where they are. It's the same with this other knowing. Just to concede that we know it is the beginning of saying, oh, how could I have been watching the thoughts I thought I was in? That was another thing we talked about yesterday that seemed to hit you, is that as soon as I think my thoughts are true and real, I think I am in my thoughts. So I choose to think I have no perspective whatsoever. So there's nothing I can do about that thought because now I have nothing to do but that thought. That's the obsession. That's the addiction. That's the compulsion of saying the only thing I can do is drink. That's it. Makes me feel better, so it's my solution. It isn't a solution when the problem's getting worse and it's killing us while we're making believe we're getting better. That's exactly the source of addiction.
Yeah. Well, you talked yesterday too, looking at the notes about thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Process of change. So time effectively is change. So it's about a dimensional thing. Everything within time takes time. If I go anywhere, if I do anything, it takes time. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So that process, when seen accurately, is always happening because everything in terms of the relative, how the absolute is revealed in the relative world is starting to see that everything in the relative world, when considered as everything rather than some things, rather than somebody, everybody, rather than some things, all things, you start to realize the absolute nature, and this is age-old philosophy, that if everything's changing, the one thing not changing is that everything's changing. You can't see that if you're looking at something rather than all things. Because it's when you see all things changing, you realize the absolute reveals itself. Why? Because the absolute is the united whole of the absolute nature of existence. It is the beingness of the existence. It is the nature of the existence. We call it God, we call it Buddha, we call it whatever we want to call it. They're all names and labels that no essence is wearing a label, a name tag. Those are things we've done to humanize it and give it some scope of form that we can relate to on a physical level. But the physicality of our experience is also absolute because it's everything that's happening in what we're doing is always happening. Everything all the time is always happening. It's not what I think about it. So it means that I can stop thinking about it and it will all continue to happen except for my thoughts about it. And yet, to not think about it while I can think is actually thinking about not thinking about it. So within the human scope of things, we're always going to be thinking, which is why we have dreams. The brain is continuing to operate. It's continuing to monitor things. It's doing what it's designed to do. And either our thoughts help bolster it and help it be better, so we age less in terms of the wear and tear of seeming time, or we grind and fight and wear ourselves out literally inside out, not just out. Those are choices, and they're all coming from thought. So the process of change is the thesis is a thought. The antithesis is all other things that don't think that way. And the synthesis is the new phoenix, per se, the new beginning of all those things that are now recombined in some new way. It's again revealing the newness of the ever-present moment, meaning that if everything that's possible is possible, it's always possible in the present, always. And one of the possibilities, because there's no limit to love, there's no limit to this infinite source, one of the possibilities is for us to think that what's impossible is possible. Doesn't mean that it's possible. It means it's impossible, but we can think it's impossible. We can think the impossibility is possible, which is exactly what a lie is trying to do. It's exactly what a mentally obsessive thoughts are trying to do, trying to turn the lie into truth. But a lie isn't even a lie if it's thinking about itself as a lie, or we're thinking about it as a lie. We now have been honest about it, so it is no longer a lie. It's only a lie as long as we think it's something other than it is. So seeing people as we think they are and listening to things as we think we hear it isn't seeing people or listening to the things we're thinking about, or seeing the things that we're actually thinking about. We're actually hearing and seeing only what we're thinking. That is delusional, to make believe that it's true, that it's accurate. Even within the scope of what's happening, you can see that conflict that's created with seeming reality. If we just say that what's happening is happening, and that would be for humans what's real and what's true, we don't have to have an opinion about it to know that. We don't have to think about it at all to know that what's happening is happening and say, oh, well, if it's always happening, then I am a part of everything that's happening. How much more could I ever want? How much of a somebody could I develop when the body I have is already intimately involved with everything that's happening? So to think what I'm thinking is all that's happening is to think that everything I see is only what I think. And that would leave me to think, first of all, it creates an impression that's depressing, gives me the sense that I'm worth less because I'm now worthless in my thinking, because I'm not relating to reality, I'm relating to only what I think. And yet I'm still immersed in reality. I am still an absolute present state of being in reality, thinking otherwise. That's the insanity of it, thinking that I can escape reality by creating my own reality, and thinking that my reality and what I think becomes reality rather than simply what I'm thinking. The divestment of that is beginning to realize the investment we've made has been addictive for so long it doesn't seem to be possible. It couldn't be true. People fight this enormously. People are upset about this. As you said, Oe, I think was your word. The seeming depth of the shit we've been standing on starts to become apparent when we even concede that what we're thinking hasn't been true all along. And what we thought about mom and dad and sister and brother and teachers and all those other authority figures that we may or may not have had issues with had everything to do with what we were thinking and nothing to do with those people. We never even knew those people on a thinking basis. Well, we were intimately connected to them on a basis we didn't think about at all, just like our interior systems, these bodily systems that we have. We undermine our own capacity to health. We undermine our own capacity for healthy relationships in that same regard. Standing in a mirror does not change the image of who we think we are. What is standing in the mirror does not change when who we think is standing in the mirror and what we think we see differs from what we're actually looking at. The image stays the same while we come up with a new concoction of thoughts. That reflection of the mirror is, in fact, our experience and all the consequences that are affected by the thinking we do and the thinking about the things we're thinking about. And I would say experience is literally the sum total of all those consequences. Face first, they're always with us, they're always happening, they're always consequential. They are not postponed because we don't feel them as much as we eventually might. But that idea that we need to wait for pain to come to terms with what's going on shows how willing we are to overlook the subtle alarm that goes off, telling us something's wrong. And we think, well, if I can handle it and pretend it's not happening, I'll get better in time. And what we're getting better at is denial. and defense and delusion and defiance. And none of those things are required if we weren't defending something that had absolutely no basis. We have not lacked faith. We have had everything. We have been faithful to things that are faithless. And we've been trusting things that have no ability to be trusted. And yet the consequence of the failure has been trustworthy all along. We just haven't wanted to admit it's been our doing. We want to think of it as something happening to us rather than being caused by us. So talking about it and starting to come to these terms is what this conversation is about, what this discussion is about. Doing it publicly, whether it be with one or two other people, gives all of us a chance to start to do it wherever we go with anyone we're with. And I'm not talking about promoting ideas and all that. I'm simply talking about sharing thoughts honestly and also mentioning I'm sharing thoughts. I'm sharing a thought. I'm not telling you the truth. I'm not telling you about you. I'm sharing you a thought I'm having about you. I'm sharing a thought I'm having about this situation. It diffuses the reactiveness because we're actually claiming the responsibility we always have for what we're thinking, but we're speaking of it accurately and openly, and it starts to become a little more palatable to interact with people rather than have them immediately think that we're telling them what to do and how to feel and what they are and how they are, when none of that is ever true. We might think we are, we might think we need to, but that all stems from this branch of false ideas that come from these ideas we have about who we think we are. So the note-taking is interesting because I found when I started writing, I gave my thoughts a place to live and I knew they would stay there. So I didn't have to think about them much. And it started to give me a gap of perspective and a little bit of a window. And I began to realize how flexible those thoughts I always thought were intractable and insurmountable and impossible to overcome, how flexible they actually were if I could manipulate them simply by doing something as simple as writing them down or as simple as acknowledging them as a thought. All of the effort and the pressure in maintaining them dissipates. Like you said, that was a good word for it. Because this isn't about resolution, which is resolving and resolving and resolving and resolving, which is maintaining. This is about disillusion, seeing that there is nothing there. There's nothing to solve. It's literally beginning to come to terms with the fact that it's all been imagined and thought to be real. And that basic element creates a hailstorm and havoc in our experience, largely to give us the sense that the complexity of it is impossible to deal with, so we can continue to do the insane thing as though there's nothing else we can do. It's all self-serving to the thought-serving thought. It isn't self-serving in the essence of who we are. It's serving the thoughts thinking of themselves, which we are employing to do that thinking. The observer, somehow or another, we're getting mixed in there, and how we choose it and why we choose it is irrelevant. That we choose it is the issue. And to see it as something that can be undone as quickly as it is done is to start seeing the immediacy of choice and the availability of the options that we have, not to choose to do what we've always done in the name of thinking there's nothing else to do. That's just a thought. That's an addictive thought, which perpetuates the problem. Again, not something we can't do, something we've probably all been doing to some degree. Lies aren't limited to the ones we think we're telling. They're any thought that isn't correct, that won't be applied when it's applied, that won't work, that won't systematically be good in the sense of being productive and beneficial, not only for us, but everyone to some degree, in any degree. If it's beneficial for anyone in any degree, it's beneficial for everyone in some degree, compared to the opposite, which is there's no benefit whatsoever to any of this because you can't apply it. You can't do math with 2 + 2 is 5. It's not going to work. It may work somewhat, and you may think you're getting there, but the maintenance of that is always going to be an eroding, corrosive aspect of all the balance you try to bring to all the mathematical sophistication that can be developed. It's kind of like thinking is a machine. And if we give it good gas and good food for thought and nourish it, it actually produces results commensurate with its capacity, rather than commensurate with its dysfunctional capacity, which is equally as great as the other, and is ultimately trying to kill us to have us stop doing what we're doing, which is nature's way of cleaning house. Just like species go extinct that no longer function within the framework of what's happening. Some of those we've caused by eliminating the environment that was conducive to their survival. And it's exactly what we do with each other when we impose these thoughts on each other and share them as though they're real and true and feed into that reactive network of thoughts, web of thoughts that are going on, and thinking that somehow or another that binds us to everyone when we're already thinking that we're bound rather than being freely interactive. We become seemingly hopelessly interreactive with everything. So the note-taking has been interesting because reading through it, I realized that clarifying some of this stuff on paper gives people, my sense is if we all know it individually, the real determination here comes not from what is said by anyone else, but what we begin conceding we know in our own experience. And I'm not going to use the word in our own self or in myself or yourself, just the fact that we have an experience that seems to be much greater and more intimately connected to everyone else than simply a self that's trying to make its way in the world and eat enough and stay warm enough and clothed enough to get by. Starts to consider it from a much broader perspective because the infinite nature of things has no perspective at all because there's no bounds to it. It's boundless and unlimited.
Well, we also talked, Jack, about being a example to others on a day-to-day basis in all our affairs. I mentioned a friend who had suffered a loss, and so, I didn't know what to say or do. Jumping into, your thoughts aren't real didn't seem like the appropriate launch, into a professional setting. But
Well, and I think the deeper issue there, Gabe, is that the telling of something to someone as though they don't know is the presumption they don't. And if it's wrong, that isn't a message worth carrying. That isn't a way of operating that's worthy of anything other than reactions and denial. So we're actually helping them get worse by triggering those things, which if we recognize can be triggered and then operate on that basis, triggering them is, again, what we're doing. We're causing it. Now, at the same time, as you begin to talk about things from your own point of view, simply as things you do, as things you've experienced, things you've seen, it relieves some of that, but it doesn't mean there aren't triggers. And those buried triggers are like landmines in people that explode. And we've all had that experience. Most of us, I imagine, have had experiences where circumstances get to the point where we just do something that's completely hysterical and emotionally unstable, anger or some kind of volcanic urge that shows that something's been building in us that needed to be released or had come to the point where it could be released because the circumstances finally warranted it in our own irrational rationalization of it. So talking about this openly can also cause reactions and all that, but at least the reactions being caused are honest reactions by people who are struggling rather than me telling people what to do and how to think and all that kind of stuff, which can immediately create an argument. So to remind people that they have a greater knowing awareness. I remember you saying that your friend was Persian, and Rumi, probably the greatest poet, one of the greatest poets that came out of Persia, spoke highly of this infinite nature. Always. This is, hundreds of years ago. Maybe even, I forget when Rumi was around. JP, do you know when Rumi was around? I'm looking it up really quickly.
No, I don't know. I'm just listening to you with my phone in my pocket. It's noisy in here.
Yeah, well, I thought your poetry, because you've written a lot of poetry and dealt with that. But he was born in 1207.
Yeah.
So it's, 800 years ago. And that, in the course of an infinite realm, that amounts to absolutely nothing because the infinite realm doesn't amount to time being a lot. It isn't this concept of forever even being possible is somewhat overlooked by realizing that if forever can never be achieved, because if forever is forever, wherever you have forever, if you wait forever, you still have forever to wait. There's no place to get to if it's here. Ever presence isn't something to get to. It's something that we always have, something that if it continues within the context of continuation and all those spatial things that we talk about, which is what words effectively define, which is our functional literacy for this relative experience we're having. If that's what it's defining, we're creating seeming limitations that we'd like to last forever, but denying the forever that always exists in the ever-present state of being. Because it's always here. It's always now. It's always where we are. It's always where anything we do is done. Anything all the time, including every small thought, including every thought we don't think we're having. So we're never out of the present. We just think things that aren't going on and think we're out of the present because we think those things we're thinking about are real and true. And we think we've voided reality while we're actually avoiding reality with this new version of reality. So there's an aversion to reality based on the new version. And there's an avoidance based on the attempt to void it. It isn't actually happening, which is why it's delusional, which is why it's insane. These are self-imposed, self-induced, because we think the self we are is what we think, and we think we're actually causing the pain to warrant how much control we have over things, which is something we talked about yesterday too. The only thing we actually control in that insanity is the misery. And since it's induced, we're still feeling the effects because it's a horror show to watch. Same way a movie is and a nightmare feels. Doesn't mean because it isn't true, it can't create effects, because it creates the effects as though it's true. And yet, when we're relying only on the effects, we're thinking the problem is the effects because we're avoiding the problem, the cause. So if you talk about clever and innovative and creative, the intimacy of this scheme is so diabolical because it constantly does what gives us the impression it isn't happening in any way that could allow us to see it clearly, because seeing it clearly is to see there's nothing there to see.
And here's the interesting part, Jack. You're doing a great job. Thanks. What is the part that you haven't been able to see? The only reason you're still taking notes and doing a show is because you haven't figured the whole thing out. As soon as you figure it out, you're not going to keep this fascination. So what part is the part you're struggling with? You told us what you know. What don't you know?
Well, if knowing is absolute, there's nothing any of us don't know. It doesn't mean that the circumstances are all predictable. And
this is your stretch. And so it's easy to say that. Let's say your stretch is, what is it that they don't know? You can say, oh, everybody knows everything. What would you say that they're having a hard time with, or that you can't? What would you say they don't know?
Are you looking for an answer you'd like me to say, or do you want to hear the answer I'm willing to give you?
The one that pays the most.
The one that what?
Pays the most.
Well, then I'll give you the one I started giving you that you asked for me to correct. If we already know, then we already know it. It doesn't have to be in the circumstances that we predict, but we can predict those circumstances to either be productive or non-productive, functional or non-functional. If I'm basing my experience on thoughts that are not true, I'm going to create dysfunction in my experience. And that is predictable. But to think it shouldn't be happening is one way I think of it is unpredictable. So my limitation, Anthony, is talking about this clearly enough The thing I was just talking to Gabe about, instigating people's reactions. I'm not trying to avoid people's reactions, but I'm trying to be clear enough that what I'm saying is simply heard as something being said based on something being thought.
Do sometimes you try to avoid people's reactions? You said you don't try. Your statement was like, don't try to avoid people's reactions.
Yes,
I'm thinking,
yes, there are times I do.
right.
Either
So
for the
that's
convenience, either for the convenience of time or the threat of violence or something, which happens. But I used to do it because I was afraid of actually experiencing simply what they thought.
And I give it to you, you still are afraid.
Well, to any degree, I'm maintaining thoughts that aren't true, that I think are true. They are born of fear. So that fear becomes evident in the awareness, in the present, if I'm honest about what's happening, if and when I'm honest about what's happening. And am I always? No, absolutely not. So it isn't reality and truth that are changing. It's my ideas about what's happening that are changing all the time, that are causing the discontent and the disabilities and the instabilities that I experience. Is it as much as before? Probably not. But it doesn't matter, because what happens, Anthony, as you know, because we've worked a long time together, what used to seem like a lot was required to get me to look, all of a sudden doesn't take quite as much to see it as something even greater than what I used to think a lot amounted to. Because it becomes obvious that it doesn't have any place to fit, and I'm really up to something that is no good in the midst of thinking I'm better. When in fact, when it comes to this mental condition, if I have a cold and I get better, the cold is over, it's done. When it comes to this mental condition, it's always a potential for me to go wrong in terms of thinking is the reality of my experience. Always.
And what is the
Doesn't go
exit
away.
strategy? What's the exit strategy? Ultimately, you've been doing this 50 years, you're the best. What does it look like? Let's say this meeting has been going on 50 years. We don't even talk about problems anymore, right? We talk about other things. Is that the goal? What is the goal? The end exit strategy?
I don't know that there's an exit strategy of something you can't exit.
Well, there has to be. Otherwise, we wouldn't be. If we're talking about it, obviously it's a possibility. And not only do I exit, I exit. I just want the last. I want the last. Like, can we just skip ahead to like the last course after we've graduated?
I know, but Anthony, that's coming from your incessant thoughts about things that aren't true and real. You want to resolve them, but you don't want to admit them now. You don't want to see that thinking you're asking me to clarify is an unclarified thinking in your own experience. So as long as you think those thoughts, you're going to look for that final solution. That's what Hitler looked for. That's what other people through history have looked for, by killing other people and maiming other people because of the diabolical trauma that they create in their own experience.
Those are your thoughts, right? That's a great thought you're having.
Well, the difference is...
No, that's the key. See, you're taking yourself seriously. If I say, well, that's an interesting thought, then you go, yeah, that is an interesting thought. Now, all of a sudden, you're not so like, this has to be the way it works out, right? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that if there's an infinite source, it's infinite. And
wait a second. I'm thinking of marketing.
negotiable.
What if we sell rose-colored glasses the way you like Jack's rose? How much? I'm a marketing guy. Those glasses, you got to look up. The camera's a little higher.
We're not marketing anything here, Anthony.
I am. I'm always marketing. See, that's my honesty. I'm always marketing. And you're marketing yourself. The reason you pick those, you're saying you're not marketing. The truth is you're wrong. You are always marketing.
Would it surprise you to think of everyone else as doing what you're doing?
Well, if we're even talking about it, obviously that's a possibility. And not only do I surprise other people, I surprise myself more.
So the impact of your thoughts.
Our thoughts, we're all connected. We're totally connected. Our thoughts.
Well, the impact of your thoughts give you
wait a second. There's no wait. They can't be mine. They have to be ours. You said everything's connected. They're our thoughts.
Yes, and we
right. So why are you saying? Why are you putting them on me? They're not my thoughts. They're our thoughts. They're partly yours. So they're mostly yours.
If we're free to think what we want, we think how we want.
And if you're even bringing that up, we're also not free to think. Like if you're telling me something, we're free. Like, you know that there's a reason you're having to tell me that.
Well, because you think it's not true.
We think.
I don't know, Anthony. I don't know. I don't
You know
speak
what the
for
truth
everyone.
is, right? Do you know what the
Yeah.
truth is?
We all know what the truth is, but now when you go into thinking, that becomes a whole other dynamic of
Do
what
you know what the truth is?
Yes,
What is the truth?
truth. Just like reality is reality, and what's absolute is absolute, and what's infinite is infinite. There's no debate there. There's no argument there. If they exist, and I suspect they do, again, just a suspicion, but the confirmation of that suspicion is beginning to utilize them and see if, in fact, there's a functional capacity that seems to become real or seems to become obvious, when in fact, I used to think I was oblivious to it
You
because
still think that. Don't give me used to think. If you're still doing it, it's not old behavior, Jack.
but I can reference things I've done, right?
So let me
Okay.
get this right. The truth always has to be true. It can't like pretend it's not true. You can pretend, but it always has, the truth is locked into being true. It can never be not true.
Doesn't that seem odd, Anthony, that that would even be in question?
At this point, no.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But part of this, Anthony, is that we have an investment in this self we've created, and we're defensive about it to try to renegotiate the terms of something that's absolutely simple enough to be truth is
Yeah.
truth.
And once
like
you let
wrong
that
is
go,
wrong.
that
By the
doesn't,
way.
and once you let that go, that doesn't mean that still doesn't exist, right? I could say, well, I don't believe in that. Like, okay, great. You don't believe in that, but it still exists.
That is the difference between something real and something we think.
But what is between that? It doesn't go real to what we think. That's what I was going to ask you. What is that? I feel like I'm on the Twilight Zone. What is that line between that? What is that called? We have to name it.
I don't know
Is
that
it
we do.
a fine line? You know it. You know everything, Jack. Don't
If
give
it
me I don't know it.
exists, if it exists, it exists. I don't have to put thought to
But
it.
I thought you know what's the name? We know everything.
Anthony, are you listening?
That's the
or are you
name. I
telling?
like the name.
Are you
Anthony.
listening
I call
or are
it
you
Anthony.
telling?
I'm both.
So you're not hearing effectively.
I heard you say Anthony. I'm asking you what the name is, and you're like Anthony. Anthony. I'm like,
Hey.
okay.
Anthony, can I say something?
No, you have to wait your turn. You know that. You know
That
the
is-
rule.
This is his turn.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I was wrong.
You sound like you're on coke. But you're really talking fast today. That's not what I wanted to say. What I wanted to say, because I hate when my buddy misquotes something. It's Himmler. It's not Hitler on the final solution.
Okay. So they seem to have collectively.
Nine.
They seem to have collectively banded together to do whatever they did.
9.
No, but the author of the final solution, whose job was to figure all that shit out, was Himmler and not
Yeah.
Hitler.
Right.
Because
But
Hitler was too busy.
he didn't do it alone.
No, he did not.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got to get in the
But-
shower because I.
Hey, I was just going to say, you're looking more and more. Do you have any sunglasses you could put on there? Because you would look exactly like Jack. I love you, buddy.
Good to see you, JP.
Oops.
So Anthony, what we're capable of doing.
No, I don't want this to be all about me. I want it to be like everybody. Instead
But you're
of just like-
talking. You're talking.
Okay.
And if there's anything true about what we talk about, then it applies to everybody. And if there's anything false about what we talk about, it applies to each one of us who is maintaining it as truth. See, that's the distinction, is that we think we can be alone by maintaining truth as though it's distinct from everyone else, when in fact that causes us to fight everyone else to try to prove that it's everyone else who's wrong, because we are in a fight with them and see them as the antagonist rather than us as the thesis of that antagonism.
Theme or thesis? Because you said maybe it's both. How do you know it's not both?
Well, thesis and antithesis are the same thing in different directions, just like pride in reverse is self-pity. It's grandiosity. It's an idea that I can be so bad and so wrong that I'm disconnected from an infinite source. And
That's
in the other direction, it is that I'm so great and so right that I know everything there is within thinking. Thinking what I know, Anthony, does not always express what I know. Well,
See, now what I hear, so
the
now what I
struggle-
heard there, here's what I hear. Words are important. See, when you said my name, all of a sudden it changes. It's like everybody else, it's a different meaning for everyone else because you said, when I'm hearing my name, I'm internalizing it, right?
I have no idea what you're doing with it. I'm going to let you talk to that. I don't want to think about what you're thinking. You're already in charge of that. I'm going to give that to you to tell us.
What is going to be on the test? If there was a test, like, and you had to pass, can you always like, what are the main points of the test?
This isn't a test. It's just a question as to whether.
Wait, now, if we're even talking about, if you have to say this is obviously, if we're even discussing it, it could be a test, right? And not only do I test it,
Anthony, it could
and
be
I
a
test
test.
myself.
Could be a test. And I would say it's the test you're creating to confirm the test you think exists.
So give me the most important, like give me a test question. I'm test based.
I'm not interested. I'm not interested in tests. I'm interested in talking about this openly so we start actually admitting.
Wait, if you have to tell me that, there's a possibility you are interested in it, right?
If everything's possible, Anthony, everything's possible.
Right. That's what I'm saying. You keep limiting. I'm saying I'm going to turn on my mute, but I'm saying you're limited. This show could be so much bigger, but you're limiting yourself. Right?
I don't have a self to limit, Anthony, except to
is that true? You don't have
except to the thoughts I have. You listening or you telling?
Both.
Except to the thoughts I have that aren't true, that I believe are true. That's the thing I think is a self, but it isn't a self. So to think I have it doesn't mean I have it. It simply means I think I have it. That doesn't create reality. That doesn't create truth.
And I like how you did the Freudian slip. You said it thinks. Let's look at where you purposely said
exactly.
Well, that is scary.
Exactly.
That's scary. That was scary.
But you can see how quickly.
No, I can't, because if we're even talking about it, it's a possibility. I can't.
Anthony, come off the rails a little bit. Just slow down, if you don't mind.
That's what I want you to tell me. Like, now I feel good. Like, that's what I thrive for.
I know, but you have a sense of knowing that you deny by the velocity you create to pretend you don't. You look to me as something I have that you don't, when in fact that's not true, if in fact truth and reality are true and real. There's something we all have. This conversation is about starting to notice that we have a much greater awareness, a much greater mental thinking capacity than we express when we start conceding that the basis for our existence is in absolutely perfect order all the time, and it doesn't even exist in time.
And is it possible you're wrong? Is it possible?
I believe it's possible to think that
that's your thought. It's possible you're wrong. You're taking yourself too seriously. You could be wrong. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change anything. Right? It doesn't even matter. Right? That's the funny part. It doesn't matter.
No.
Like,
here's what matters, Anthony. Here's what matters, Anthony.
No, wait. If you have to tell me that, it's obviously possible it doesn't, right? So it's like it's pointless. Nothing.
Here's what matters. Do you want to hear what matters?
No.
Is that people are dying, and people are succumbing by virtue of something that is a mental condition and killing each other in the name of thinking it's the only thing they can do. That tends to be, in my human experience, something that matters to mention.
And that's why I love you, because you did that for me. What you're talking about is the reason I'm here, bro. I wouldn't be here I could be doing anything else, but this is what I choose because I have to. There's no choice.
Well, I don't.
There is a choice, but there is no choice.
The choice is that you're here.
Right. Exactly.
So if you have a greater sense of knowing, I don't need to direct this conversation. And to the point you made about not doing it, as people talk about it more openly, there's a lot less reason to do it.
For no reason. There's no reason. What if there was no reason?
Anthony, I always have reasons for what I do.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Well, listen, is it possible you don't? Is it possible you don't?
In a rational process.
Is it possible? I'm just asking for possible.
Anthony, you answer that for yourself, all right?
I'm saying I
You
did.
answer.
It's possible. Anything is possible. You're the guy that's telling me all day long anything's possible. Now you're like, well, except for this. That's not possible.
I'm telling you what I am
I mean,
choosing.
it's how your posture changed, right?
Anthony, I'm telling you what I am choosing. And it's
Thinking. You're
based-
telling me what you're thinking.
Yes, exactly.
Not right. Not what you're
Exactly.
acting like it's just what you're it's a thought.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And if
And
it's
once we go away
accurate,
from a thought, we have a
Anthony,
problem.
if it's accurate, it's
It's never
applicable.
accurate. If you draw one point, you can't by putting a point on the graph, you can. Now you've interrupted.
Yes. In absolute terms, you're absolutely correct, Anthony.
But I could be
And
wrong. But
and-
there's a chance.
Anthony, if we're making a transition here and growing, you might want to listen a little bit.
Well, that's the
I know
problem.
you got a lot of velocity going on and a lot of charge in whatever's happening. But if we have the capacity to begin to think in terms that are actually reasonable rather than irrational, the difference is we're going to construct value that's going to be beneficial and useful to other people rather than continue to just debate things for the sake of making believe that we're really intelligent by coming up with all kinds of conflicted ideas that we can always create. But how useful are they about doing what we can do in ways that become beneficial for everybody? Humanity has been stuck in trying to figure things out that are already figured out.
And I don't even like that term, humanity. Why does it have the word man in it?
We have the capacity to discuss this at a magnitude of thought that would be inclusive and productive and useful and inspiring and an adventure and an exploration. And we don't do that very well. I don't do that very well. So I would like to get better at doing that. I
do it perfectly. Because it's the way it is. It's not about the way I do. You act like everything's still thought based. It's like I did it perfectly because I did it.
Okay. That's a thought.
Right. There you go. See, you took me right. You need somebody to just go, that's a thought. Because I was the lecturer on thoughts and then I forgot that it's just a thought.
Anthony, you are a man that I know struggles with obsessive thinking and struggles with the inability to seem to get enough while you continue to try to get more. I know that about you because you share that about that.
And I have.
So to play dodgeball in this conversation is to give you more and more excuses to continue to think you can dodge what you're doing. And how.
Or we start the professional dodgeball league and take this to the next limit. It's the PDL. Professional Dodgeball League. They're like, how, dodgeball? Yeah, I love dodgeball. Gabe laughed. That was good. For any other laughs out there? Jack, let's get real. I don't like this. As soon as I started seeing notes, I need to know more about, like, you need to identify in the beginning of each meeting, I think.
We don't need to get real. We're real in the essence of our experience.
Right?
It's what we're thinking, Anthony, that we're struggling with. So if we have any benefit talking about it in terms that actually complement and allow us to begin to expand our thinking's awareness rather than consider
or
things.
What if you tell me what, see, that's what your brain, you're talking, but tell me your thoughts. Like if I said, Jack, I don't want to hear a lecture. Tell me your thoughts. What are your thoughts right now? They're different. Tell me your thoughts.
Anthony, you don't listen anyhow. Why would you not want to hear a lecture? You don't listen. You're listening only to what you're thinking.
Wait, is it possible that you're wrong and I really am listening?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so then what's with the hard time? Right, dude, you're wrong. I'm realizing all of a sudden, as like the teacher, at some point, the student has to be better than the teacher, right? Right?
And yet you return.
Exactly, because I like self-defeat.
Got me laughing too, Anthony. Did it.
Right? Jack, you're taking yourself too seriously. You think that you're like, tell me your thoughts. I don't want to hear what your lecture is. I want to hear the thoughts. That's the scary stuff, not your lecture. Your lecture you can do in your sleep.
Anthony, if you wanted to hear them, you would be listening to what I'm saying.
No, I would be asking. I don't think you know the difference between your lecture and your thoughts. Do you? Because your thoughts are not your lecture. I want to hear your thoughts. Do you know the difference? The lecture is what you're not even thinking when you're doing your lecture, like you're thinking about other things. And if you're like me, right?
He's not like you.
Yes, he is, because he is me. I'm him. We're the same. That's right. I have a black shirt on.
Not everybody agrees with that, Anthony.
Right?
No, I don't agree with you.
That's your thought?
Yeah, but I don't agree with the premise.
Right, but that's fine because it's just a thought. Like I don't agree with it either. I just say things.
But what we're trying to say here, and what I'm trying to say, is that I'm not sure where you're going today.
No, what I'm saying is that I realize Jack hit on it. Whatever it is, it's just a thought, right? You're lecturing me, but it's just a thought.
I'm not lecturing, Anthony. A lecture is something prepared for presentation. This is wholly unprepared.
So you didn't prepare at all. It's wholly unprepared, but you've been doing this for 25, 30 years.
For my
right?
whole life, yes. Okay.
Right. So how is that wholly unprepared? See, that's misleading.
Okay. So it's wholly prepared.
Right. Or not. It doesn't matter. What I'm saying is just a thought. Like, you're right. Like when you tell Katie, hey, this is a thought I'm having. She's like, okay, that's a thought. But there's
what's interesting though, Anthony, when you're struggling, it seems to really matter. When you're in a playful mood, you think it doesn't matter. So the time to actually begin to apply things that may be applicable, I would suggest they're probably better done during those times you feel playful.
Or not. It doesn't matter. It matters. It's like, it's just a thought. That's your thought.
Yes, it's just my thoughts.
Right. You notice how your posture changed. When you realize this, you're sitting different, you're relaxed, you're breathing. It's just your thought. You don't have to tell me and make sure that it comes off right. Just your thought.
Okay.
And so what is your thought? I want to hear your thoughts, not the lecture. Does that make sense?
No, because you've been hearing my thoughts.
I haven't been hearing your thoughts. Tell me your thoughts.
You're calling my thoughts a lecture so you can discredit the thinking.
And if we're discussing it, it's a possibility. Not only do I do it to you, Jack, I do it worse to myself.
I know that point became clear to you a couple of years ago, and you've repeated it 100 times. There are thousands of potential ways to look at this, Anthony.
Or only one. Isn't it possible there's only one way?
Not within thinking. There's
not within thinking. That's thinking, it, boom, right? That's where I want to. That's exactly.
Thinking has a vast capacity to consider things going on that aren't even happening. So imagine the vastness of that capacity. It doesn't mean that thinking isn't in reality. It means that what we think of isn't always real.
I think thinking is reality.
Okay. I know you do. I know that's why you struggle.
It's because it's a thought. I can think that. You think that too. It's a thought. Right?
You tell me.
I'm telling you, it's a thought.
Okay.
Right? Am I right or wrong?
Doesn't matter.
Right? Damn it. You win again. No matter what I think of winning. I had you and you're like, it doesn't matter.
But Anthony, this isn't about winning. It's about
right.
Anthony, it isn't about winning. It's about noticing.
It can be about winning as long as you realize that's your thought. It can be about winning. It's great. It's about winning. That's your thought.
If you want to reduce it to that, you are welcome.
That's what I'm reducing it to. And that's where we can save hour. Dude, Jack, that's the end. That's why I don't want to record this. I don't like this on recording. I'd appreciate it off, but it is what it is. Or not. It is what it is or not. It isn't what it is always. It's just a thought. And notice how you're touching all of a sudden you're thinking. I can tell. When you're thinking, now your hand, you're touching your mouth. Right? Because you realize you're so serious, your show. It's just a thought. Right? Look at your hands.
My brain, Anthony, is always thinking.
No, it's not. Stop
Yes, it
that.
is.
thought. No, is it
It is.
possible it's not always thinking?
Not, if I'm in a coma, perhaps.
No.
but I
Okay,
haven't
so it's
been.
possible. It's possible it's not always thinking.
But I haven't been in a coma, so I'm.
No, I can put you in the spot where you're not always like, you know how you sound, your hands are twisted. You're saying my brain always is thinking. Relax, Jack. Take a breath. Take a breath. Let me see your breath.
I'm taking a breath every moment.
No, right? You're flying here. You like, I'll take a breath. Got it, right? Notice your hands. When I took a breath, your hands changed to a much better position. It's about breathing. You should do breathing exercises. Right? Silence means that everything is fine, that there are no questions.
Oh, I have to walk to the car, gentlemen. That's
Right?
why
I love it. And you
couldn't
broke.
comment.
Fucking broke. The strongest guy broke.
Hey,
He's
Anthony,
like a shot of whiskey,
Can you
like
hear
a
me?
shot of decaf whiskey.
can you hear me?
If you're even asking that, obviously. Not only do I not hear other people, I don't hear myself.
Wait, did you just answer me?
If we're even talking, not only do I not have the answer for other people, I don't have the answer for myself sometimes. That's my stretch. I don't have the answer always. Okay, go. Gabe, laugh. We got to laugh there. Go. Go, John.
So I don't know how many cups of coffee you had this morning, but I've been listening to you for I don't know, a long time on this particular program, and I never heard you sound so argumentative and amped.
John, your sound has gotten a little bit echoey.
Sorry about that. I was doing that. Okay, go try again, John. I won't be like pissed this time. Go. Yeah, that's me, Jack. Sorry about that.
John, you're somehow
Yeah,
your
when
cell,
anybody has different ideas.
your cell connection is starting
To
to.
know why you're being so argued this language from him, and now you get any better?
I don't think we're hearing you completely, John.
I think what he said is that I'm really cool and that I shouldn't be acting this way.
No, I don't think I said that at all. And I don't even know when you think you're funny. But maybe that was one right there. What I'm trying to ask is that what did you do this morning that you came in like you know the language that he speaks, and so you're going to use it against him.
Right? That's the truth. And thanks for calling me on that, because that's right. Like, I realize he's so right because he's so wrong, and you're right. And then that's why I don't like doing recorded meetings, because I don't want to be this on recording.
Well, but answer my question.
And can you state the question again, please?
Yeah, you got to listen, Anthony.
You were cutting out for a second.
Yeah.
John, you were cutting out for a second. Your voice was cutting out for a second.
So what I'm saying is, what did you do this morning that you came in and you decided that you were going to, because you know the language that Jack used, that you were going to use it against him because you were smarter and faster and quicker and not listening? What did you do this morning that wound you up so much?
What do you think it is? If we're even talking about it, obviously it's a possibility. What do you think it was?
I'm asking you a question.
But I can't. We're unrecorded. Nothing is different.
Oh, all right. Well, on that note, the Anthony show. I am going to sign off.
Don't do that, because what I want to apologize. Obviously I made you upset. Not only do I make you upset, I make myself more. Like, I've been pissed. If I'm not laughing and having fun, I'm not gonna. There's no point in it. Is that okay, John? Or
He went. So did time.
yeah. Can you turn off the recording at this point, Jack? I mean, otherwise, I got it. This is why I never liked the recorded shows.
Well, that's what we come here to do. And that's what we upload for people to listen to. And I can understand some reluctance, Anthony, who just faded. So we lost JP and Ty and Anthony at the same time.
I'm here, Jack.
Yeah, I know. So we start where we continue where we started. So certainly all possibilities are possible, and this could absolutely be wrong. Except for one thing. There seems to be some demonstrable evidence that people in droves have gotten better with respect to compulsions by starting to look at their experience honestly and begin to admit what was happening accurately. Seems to be a freedom that comes out of that, and a capacity to not do the thing that seemed impossible to stop doing. If we can have compulsions get better as a result of simply acting in ways that are honest about what's happening, and the mental problem at the core of those compulsions is thinking about thoughts being reality and truth, the mental obsession, then it has no hold on us whatsoever, except the hold we continue to have on it by believing it's true, by believing it's impossible, by believing it's needs to be stopped, as though there's something to stop, when it's our own insistence to continue thinking the way we have chosen to think to cause the impression that there's nothing we can do about it. So it's the only thing we can do, and we continue. And that desperation creates psychotic breaks with reality and truth in the name of trying to argue in favor of reality and truth. I've done it enough, long enough, and I do it at times. Yes, to Anthony's point, I do get reactive. There are parts of me that are not very settled, but having that opportunity to see them and witness them and notice the discomfort and the awkwardness and the instability that comes with them isn't something I've done very well my entire life. And I don't know that I've done it well enough to avoid continuing to learn to do it better, to function on a level that's accurate enough, and to notice those disturbances as something as my body language telling me in perfectly clear terms that what I'm thinking is wrong, that how I'm thinking is wrong, that something about my thinking is wrong. If I can admit that as a starting point, it begins to diffuse the tendency of consistently trying to argue in favor of something that just doesn't seem to stop when it's my own insistence that perpetuates the persistence of the thing.
Yeah, I've never seen it, as we just saw, in words, if that makes sense. I've seen it in drinking, drug use, lying, cheating, stealing. I've never seen it sort of purely in words like today.
Well, my sense is, though, Gabe, we're seeing it in a lot of the impossibilities we think it is to communicate with other people. We're seeing it.
More and more, I think, more and more.
The reactiveness, the seeming impossibility of getting along and being productive and all that, I think, is all evidence of it. And my sense is people are really stressed right now. There's a level of awareness that it isn't wrong to be stressed when stressful circumstances are happening. It isn't wrong to be wrong when we're thinking wrong. It's wrong to think the stress shouldn't be happening, and wrong to think the wrong is right. And the only thing we can do, it's starting to formalize it and actualize it as though it's any more than what we're thinking, that tends to be where the wrong comes from, in my experience.
Yeah. a clear example to me of that is all of this recent reporting on heat stroke and heat, how to deal with the heat, but it's treating the symptom. It's not, if human beings continue to act this way,
Yeah. If we can feel better, we think the problem's solved. And that's been historically, that's exactly what happens. Think about the concept of thinking about our thinking turning into who we are. What do we become concerned about? Appearance. How do we look? If we look better, we think we're better. If we feel better, we think we're better. But what's worse in the cause isn't made better by symptoms that feel better. It's actually made worse because we think we've got a handle on it, when in fact we're maintaining the same basic toxic urge that motivates most of our ultimate actions, which is why those problems tend to get worse, because we continue to do the thing we've been doing all along, thinking because we created some interim agreement that in 12 years we'll start actually functioning as a world that can function together and be less dysfunctional, that it's all fine, so we can continue doing whatever we're doing. Plastic's a great example, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Plastic, if I remember right, I researched this a little bit 6 months ago or so, but the consumption of plastic increases 5 to 10% every single year, consistently.
Mm-hmm.
There's 400 or 450 million metric tons produced. Now think about it. Every year. It's going up 10%. That means we would have to recycle 45 million metric tons to break even. Don't think that's happening.
No.
What's interesting is the government, and I'll talk about this as a social issue, might be wrong again. I'm not speaking from a point of authority or anything other than my own thoughts. But in California, they tax plastic bottles and cans so that they can encourage recycling. Well, the recycling was often bought by Japan or China in big bulk because they were using it for other purposes, and they stopped buying it. So the bottles that are being paid for are not being recycled because they can't afford to. So the thing that was done to resolve the problem is still being collected while nothing's being done about the problem in an amount that would be sufficient to actually cover each bottle that's being paid for recycling purposes. So it's just a failure. Doing things based on appearance and looking better doesn't mean there's any substance to that. And if the substance of reality and truth is not seen as substantive, everything becomes how things appear and how things seem. It switches this whole seeming reality to how things appear because we're using illusion, which is a projection of thought, an image, literally an image, as the basis of who we think we are. So why wouldn't we be concerned about appearance? Why wouldn't we do things that look better in the meantime so we can run off and play and say we got it all handled while we're doing the thing that's worse, and it is growing in the meantime? If it happens to us individually, it's happening socially to all of us, with all of us, from all of us, as a result of all of us individually. So I don't do this because I think I do it well. I do this because I would like to get better talking about it more publicly.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And we do this anonymously to also remind listeners that you are free to listen without any of the stigmas that would normally be attached to talking about mental illness or addictions, because mental illness is an addiction to thinking about thinking. Because when we become who we think our life is threatened by not thinking about ourselves. And the self we're thinking about is literally just thought thinking of itself, who we now determine becomes ourself. And we talk about it that way. I was thinking to myself, I was talking to myself, and we're actually thinking and talking to our thoughts. So to eke out a little bit of a rational conversation on this has been a bit of an effort, and I have been committed to it. And I do know that much of what I see is wrong because I've corrected 1,000 things I initially thought in the writing I've done to try and refine it and get it to a point where it stabilizes in words, which I don't think is ever ultimately possible because there's always divisions in words that can overlap in terms of what definitions are and all that. But truth is true is pretty basic as a sentence. Reality is reality. Reality is real. That's pretty simple. To begin to consider those things on a basis of not what we think is true and real, but actually a reality and truth that actually exists everywhere with everything and everywhere beyond everything and everywhere, is starting to actually grasp something that we can't avoid, we can't deny, we can't lose, we can't grab or let go of. It has us. It is the nature of our existence. If that is in fact correct, and we know that, doesn't mean I know all the variables of all the little things that are going to happen on any given day, but it means that I have a stable foundation to begin to deal with those things, interact with those things, think about those things, that isn't shaken by my inability to notice that the shaky foundation I create by making believe who I am is what I think doesn't allow any constructive thinking to come out of that, because the desperation it leads to always causes more of the same thing, just like a seed for an oak tree causes an oak tree. To begin contemplating in thought that this absolute nature is our absolute nature is to begin to suspend and dissolve that thinking that goes into those manic tirades and tendencies of making believe we can think our way in or out of this, and that it's all up to thinking harder and harder and faster about it to resolve it, when there is no resolution in something that has never been a problem, which I would suggest is reality and truth. Whatever's infinite, whatever's absolute, whatever's unlimited, whatever's omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, those aren't things that are exceptional because they're normal. They're actually the basic state of our existence. To think of something so fundamental as our existence wrongly means to think of everything we do right as being wrong, and not reckoning with it as wrong, but seeing it as right. So what do? More of the same. It gets worse. And apparently we need a lot of pain, well, not a lot of suffering, to come to terms with what we're actually doing historically. Seems to be. It certainly was that way in my life. When I did things right and well, I took credit for being right and well. When I did things wrong, I claimed it was somebody else, somewhere else, something else, not having anything to do with me. So I appreciate the notes, Gabe, and I appreciate that you're reading them, and also having the perspective, because it can stabilize some of these points where they can be written out. And I suspect people can be reminded of things that they know. And if they start thinking about things, just like we're told that we're powerless over alcohol in Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't understand that at first. I thought that meant that we're powerless, so I need to exert more control over my drinking. So what did I do? I drank more. I drank out of control to prove I had control. It's the same with this thinking. If I can do those things in thought, I can live in delusional ideas that are desperate and have me act in ways that are completely obscene and absurd. And think it's the only thing.
Just witnessed.
Well, but he's come a long way, and it's.
No, I think it's a great example. It's a wonderful thing that happened. It's sort of,
and he's right in a lot of the things. I am wrong in a lot of what I think in terms of how I perceive things. But I do suspect that there is a rightness that we're all aware of, that we can talk about openly, that begins to remind us of the stable nature of our existence, rather than foment all these other ideas to reinforce the idea that all we are is unstable, and everything's instability is the nature of our existence, and desperation is the only thing we can do. And then be afraid of how we look or are heard by other people. It's a pretty good clue that people who are afraid of how things appear are thinking about who they are only as how they think they are, based on how they appear to be. How things appear is not how things are. How things are is how they are. How they appear is how they seem. How they seem is how we think of them, not how they are. It's worth noting if it's accurate. I could be wrong.
No, that's a definition of seem.
Yes.
It's not untrue.
So the growth is in the development of the conversation. It isn't in the accuracy of the conversation, but also the reckoning with the inaccuracy of the conversation. Anthony talked about an exit strategy. The exit strategy for addiction is suicide.
Yeah.
And all compulsions are suicidal. They're all doing something that is not good for us and literally puts our body at risk and shortens its lifespan, its life form span, based on the undermining of our bodily systems that can't function properly in the face of stress. It undermines their ability to do what they're designed to do and maintain balance and health. Interesting that unstable thoughts would create the same instability, manifest the same instability in our physical experience, almost to show us that the thinking is right. So for our thinking to be right means that disease is the only thing we can expect. And we have become accustomed historically to think of disease as something humans suffer from, but miracles of healing or healing is only a miracle. It's not the way it's designed. It's actually the opposite, exactly like a thought tries to be only what it can't be. Healing isn't a miracle. Healing is natural. Our bodies are designed to heal. They're also designed to disintegrate at a certain point. That isn't something to fear. That is something to look forward to, because it's going to happen. And when it does, that one of the guys, Dr. Christopher Kerr, that I've added on the link of the weekly announcement, talks about the fact that there is a reckoning for people who don't die unexpectedly, like in near-death experiences, or have experiences that are unexpected where they die temporarily or they face death in ways and see things that are pretty profound. But he said as people die slowly and naturally, they have a reckoning with what's gone on in their life that's just. They begin to see it as their part. They begin to see how they were involved. They begin to see it as something that frees all the ideas they had from the people they held against anything against. And that's a pretty beautiful thing to recognize. My question is, why do we have to wait for death to be able to do that? Wouldn't seem to me to be the highest and best use of our life to need to wait till we die to actually come to terms with what we're doing on a daily basis. And my suspicion is we are not afraid of death, we're afraid of life, and we're afraid of the thoughts that are contrary to the thoughts we think save us and create us and maintain us by obsessively thinking about them. We think if we stop those thoughts, we're going to die. Those thoughts are born in fear. So of course, when we think about stopping them, we become afraid, which is a bully's way of continuing to have us think those thoughts are in control, while in fact we are controlling those thoughts the whole time. We're insisting they persist by resisting what we're doing and not accurately assessing it and starting to just simply admit it's a thought. It is, and Anthony said a lot of it. I mean, he's gotten a lot of the bullet points. But personalizing them, not in a way that the self you're thinking, personalizing them is beginning to assimilate the knowingness with the thinking we each do. And that's not something I can do for anybody, and I can't tell anybody how to do that. We all do that in whatever way we all do that. But that honest appraisal tends to give us an awareness that something dramatic has shifted, because the immediacy of the disillusion of all those other thoughts that are constantly shifting disappears, and there's a stability that becomes obvious. You've experienced it, Gabe. Anthony's experienced it. And it's pretty profound, I would say, which means finding, which means it's never been lost. We're finally seeing it as profound because we're finally realizing that this present state of being has always been present, always been ours, always been all of ours. That's the stability of knowing. The knowing isn't about every circumstance in detail. And perhaps that knowing nature knows all those things. And perhaps as we get better at even thinking about them at the most fundamental level, we'll start to predict and know things. My sense is we do have some awareness of what to expect, because we know when we fear doom that we're heading toward it, because we're creating doom now. What else is going to happen if we keep doing it chronically? We have some predictive ability, but the way things go seems to be sort of a wonderland of variation, like a sailor at sea. No sailor has ever set sail and gone the exact direct path, and yet most of them have arrived where they wanted to go. So this isn't about trying to know all the little details and all that kind of microcosmic stuff. It's about noticing that we can always get where we're going if we're willing to go there. and that we always get where we're going by the willingness we have to think we need to get there and never seem to arrive. We're guaranteed in both those respects. If we're faulty in the premise, we're going to receive faulty. We're going to think what's faulty at the other end had nothing to do with us. Because if we denied it to begin with, we're going to perpetuate it until it turns into those circumstances. And the initial denial will be reflected in our inability to admit we had anything to do with it. Again, as Anthony said, I can be wrong in all of this. But after working with dozens, hundreds of people, it seems that with time and consideration, and rather than reinforcing the stories, beginning just to drill down a little bit on the immediacy of this availability all the time, people start having awarenesses that sort of shift dramatically, and they don't even often know it's happened because it's so natural to be doing what's natural that once what's unnatural disappears, it takes them sometimes months or years to even notice they're not doing what they used to do all the time.
Yeah.
And that's pretty amazing to see, because it really does reflect the fact that we've been wrong a long time through history to make believe that there's nothing we can do about it, but continue to do the same thing we've always done. And it's pit human against human. Our own species has been the greatest predator against our own species. That is unheard of among species.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So the thing that we claim creates superiority in us, the intellect we have and the ability to contemplate, to think of our thinking, has been turned into our greatest liability to the degree we maintain it as something that we can do in the opposite direction of what it was designed to do. And we're perfectly free to do that. Absolutely perfectly free to do that. And obviously, we've proven that. The question is, have we had enough of that proof to notice that we also can do exactly the thing that's the best for everyone in all ways, not as some strange phenomenon that we have to work toward, but as an expression of some absolute phenomenon that already exists. And my suspicion is that's what thinking's designed to do, is to channel or express that absolute knowing. And when it's confounded by what we're asking it to do that's wrong in the name of right, we think the only thing we can do is continue to perpetuate what's wrong and make believe that that other thing is completely unknown. We don't have anything to do with it. We don't know it. We're completely at a loss, etc. I've enjoyed our weekly walks, by the way.
Yeah, they're just so damn early.
7 o'clock. What's a better time for you?
I don't know, 10?
3?
No. 3 p.m.
Isn't your workday a little bit up and running by then?
It's, yeah, kind of. But I'm like in my kitchen in my sweats with a cup of coffee, you know, like I'm not walking, talking about serious topics. But yeah, it is kind of, especially with the kids.
Well, maybe we should start doing it at 3 or 4 and you'll think 7 is a break. Just to show, you know, keep in mind also, this is something that I don't say a lot and really think helps. We're not talking about not trying to feel better. We're not talking about doing things that can give us a little reprieve from the insanity that we seem to suffer from when we're really in the depths of it. We're not trying to stop that. Just notice that if we can feel better about something that's wrong, there's great flexibility in that wrong to feel better about. And that one of the proofs of the underlying problem is the fact that we can actually try to get over it and feel like we've gotten over it and feel like we feel better than it. Even while we're maintaining it, the fact that we can even do that shows that we have great flexibility in that basic thought that seems to be intractable and impossible to let go of and stop. The fact that it's become familiar just gives us the impression like family is familial, like it's natural for us. It isn't. It's, people call it human nature, but it is not human nature to oppose our nature and to do things that undermine our ability to experience nature and express nature. So the flexibility that is seen is the bonus of saying, oh, if I can feel better about it, it isn't as intractable or as consuming and impossible as I might think it is. to begin to notice that it doesn't even have any basis for existence, but something I'm thinking, I don't even think I'm thinking. And that's where the real underlying in my experience is, that when I began to admit I was thinking a lot of things I didn't even think I was thinking, I began to see how delusional I was to think that things happened to me and out of nowhere, as I used to think, rather than see that this is the darkness I've put them in to make believe that if I couldn't see them, they weren't there. And it typically is what kids are afraid of when they think of ghosts. When the lights are off, they can't prove that nothing's there, so they imagine the worst because they feel afraid. And they're projecting that something must be in the room for them to feel afraid, when actually they're just alone going to sleep. And they're used to being with people. They're connected to people. So leaving a light on gives them a chance to say, oh, there's nobody here. There's nothing here. The darkness always seems to immediately suggest there's something there. Why? Because it can't be proven not to be. There may be something there. Who knows? There could be somebody standing in the dark. But when I keep my thoughts in that way, I'm doing the same juvenile activity I did when I was a kid and was afraid to have the lights turned off. My father lived in a golf club. He was a professional golfer in Detroit, and the bedroom had no windows. It was sort of built into this commercial building. And I used to be taken in there to be given naps, and it was pitch black. And it was a little uncomfortable. And I don't think I really ever I don't remember feeling afraid of ghosts and that sort of thing. But the pitch blackness was somewhat of a wonderland of, you could think anything you wanted because there was nothing stimulating. There was nothing visible. Our sight tends to be one of the most stimulative senses we have in our body, the one we rely on the most. So how things look is how we think they are, rather than just realizing that that's how they appear to our sight. And it's what we're thinking about them that we really make believe is how they are, not what we're actually seeing. We often don't even see what we're seeing. We see what we think we're seeing. Same with the hearing of what people are saying isn't generally what they're saying, but what people hear they're saying. That's the obsessive nature of thinking. But that darkness, where I think I keep those things, is a very convenient outflow of this idea when I was young that if it was dark, I couldn't see things, so I imagined things that could be scary. There was no way to say, well, there's nothing there, because I didn't have the light to prove it. When I begin to notice that I'm not thinking, that I'm thinking things I don't think I'm thinking, I'm bringing light to it by warming the trend, creating a global warming trend, a warming trend toward it, because I'm attending to it in a way that addresses it and starts to actually acknowledge it and starts to have me say, oh, if I'm thinking things I'm not thinking, then it should not surprise me to have things happen that I don't expect, and to have me at the center of the cause of those things. And as I did, I began seeing more and more of those thoughts that I had buried, seemingly buried, that I had the narrative around that were buried, so I could justify being irresponsible for them, and started to really come to terms with the fact that if the responsible essence of reality and truth is responsible for reality and truth, then essence is essential to all living things, creatures and otherwise, inanimate objects included, things that don't think but simply know what to do. And that makes us responsible, not as an option of something we can give and take, but something that we naturally are. So the consequences we feel naturally tell us when we're acting and thinking irresponsibly, which means doing something that won't work, which means we're putting ourselves at risk, which means our instincts are coming into view to say something's wrong here. Watch out. Start to prepare. If we're not addressing it accurately, we seem to have no hope in resolving it accurately. So anyway, this was a new experience today, like all experiences are, and will continue, I expect.
No, a beneficial one. I've never encountered someone so caught up in thinking.
Well, another point is that I suspect there's a lot of thoughts. JP has a lot of thoughts too that don't align with mine. And I don't think he's wrong. I just think they're thoughts, just like I don't know that I'm right or wrong when I'm having these thoughts. My goal is if I apply them and things start working more productively, there's a pretty good chance that that thinking's more accurate than inaccurate. Right? I might not hit 100% home run in everything that I do, but I start seeing that the process of what I do becomes a little easier, a little more palatable, a little easier to appreciate and learn from, rather than depreciate and think there's nothing to learn and I don't want anything to do with it. And that, to me, is the ability of humans to get better at being human and get better at expressing it in a way that is abundant and loving and caring and natural, rather than one that is unnatural and unhealthy and diseased and reactive and contrary to health, contrary to the perpetuation of this existence that we're sharing, or the value in that existence. So, another day, another experience. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Love you, Gabe.
Love you too. Thanks, Jack. Appreciate
See you, brother. You
Okay.
bet. You too. Thanks. Thanks for your text the other day, too.
Yeah. Thanks, Jack.
Got it. And all out there, we're not apart. We're together. We can think we're apart, and we think for the seeming selves we have. But the thinking we do is the one thing we have that seems to distinguish us, and to use it in ways that keep us feeling alone and apart is to think of it as something that creates loneliness and separation, when in fact it's only based in thought. So we're coming to terms. If you have any thoughts, if you have any concerns, if you have any questions, there's an email in the direct, I think the information on the podcast contact, I believe, contact@mentalobsession.com. And you're always welcome to reach out and say hello. And we know you're out there, whoever you are, wherever you are, doing what you're doing, to be listening to this now.